So I was in a discussion thread not too long ago, and we got talking about sausage fattener and also camel fat. But I wanted to take a look at sausage fattener today and just see what's going on, because it's been a favorite of a lot of EDM producers for a long time, and it's a relatively simple plugin. But on the website here on Data Life, they do mention it's more than just a distortion plugin. Also a compressor and the distortion and maybe some other stuff going on there. So I wanted to take a look in Plugin Doctor and see what's actually going on. So as you can see, we have Sausage Fattener and Free Clip loaded up. There's a couple views on Plugin Doctor that are helpful for looking at this, and we already know it's a distortion plugin, so it's non-linear. The linear view is still a little bit helpful, but we'll also supplement that with looking at some of the other processing. So the fatness knob here, it's like a drive or a gain knob going into a saturation stage, but supposedly a little bit more than that. You can see on the oscilloscope, it's mostly working like a clipper. It's not quite going to like a full square, so there's a little bit more going on, but it's actually, we can back this down a little bit. So we have our sine wave, and it's squaring off it as it reaches the ceiling. So let's compare that to Free Clip, where we have a few different clipping types we can compare it to. So maybe hyperbolic tan is always a good place to start. We'll just equalize the gain here. And yeah, so Free Clip is this outer one. It's not doing exactly the same thing. You can see the shape of Sausage Fattener. It's quite a bit. It's not as square. It's like a smaller or narrower duty width sort of on the cycle. More of a slant still. So they're not behaving exactly the same. Arctan. Let's back this off again. So they sort of start off the same level. This time the Arctan signal just reaches the ceiling a lot sooner, but similar shapes at the end. Oops. Cubic. That's pretty close again. And maybe we'll look at hard clipping as well, because there is a chance that this is actually hard clipping. Yeah, I think it's a little bit ambiguous. I think it's like a hyperbolic tangent with a little bit of extra processing. So to get a sense for that, maybe we can look at some of the other views. We'll start with dynamics here to see if we can see any compression. So clipping is a type of compression. Soft saturation is a type of compression, but we're not getting the sort of knee down here, like a threshold and a knee that sort of goes up at an angle like you would see in a normal compressor plugin. So this makes me think it's just a clipper. Looking at this, it sort of flattens off at the top here. Let's try a different frequency, just takes a while to load, so we'll let it clear and raise it up. Yeah, it sort of just hits that ceiling and levels off. So I'm thinking it's more or less a wave shaper, just saturating, not necessarily a time-dependent compressor with like an attack and a release and threshold. You can look at the harmonics. Maybe, okay, we have our fundamental, and they come up pretty quickly there. What is this? So this is 55. Our first harmonic is 3 times that. Let's make this an even 100. So 100, 300, 500, 900, a little bit of 7. So we have all the odd multiples, odd order harmonics, which isn't too surprising. Alright, so this time I loaded up ProQ, and we're looking at the linear analysis tab, which again isn't going to be totally accurate because we do have nonlinear behavior, well, distortion, but we can still learn a couple things. So first let's turn up the color and see what it's doing. So we have some sort of EQ curves, notably this spell filter that seems to raise an amplitude and goes up to about 6,750 hertz, thereabouts. And basically down to about 40 hertz by the time it disappears. So with the fatness and the color all the way down, we have what looks like a high pass filter. But if we turn up the fatness a little bit, we have, it actually seems to behave more like a shelving EQ, probably a low shelf, boosting and lowering these low frequencies. And of course, as we raise it, it looks like a bell, or maybe the shelf is resonant, but you'd expect a dip down here if it was. So probably like a low shelf combined with just a bell EQ, and sort of coupled together. So I think we can pretty closely replicate this in Max for Live, and then combine that with what we think the saturation stage is, and we can probably get pretty close to this in Max. Alright, so I got it all together. We have 3 EQ curves, all going into a cascade object, left and right. So we have our low shelf here. We have our low frequency peaking filter, and our high frequency peaking filter that shifts frequencies and also gains up. And as you can see, we have a whole bunch of scale knobs. This was just sort of a trial and error process, looking at the measurements from Plugin Doctor and matching best I could to the fat and color knobs. And so there's some scaling. Sort of, it's sort of mode dependent. Sometimes these three parameters, the frequency, gain, and Q, change differently if the fat or the color knob is active or partway up, and then different exponential curves as well. So just sort of a trial and error process. So we have the audio coming in, the EQ curve that's set by both the fat and the color knobs, and then the hyperbolic tangent soft clipping. We're driving the input to that with the EQ boost, as well as also a boost here, sort of a DC boost, or amplitude, I should say, not DC. And we have an interface. These are not inactive, so the color will be a little bit different. So I made a test track here. This is this plugin here, Bertram EQ Curve Analyzer, is similar to Plugin Doctor. It only does the EQ curve itself, and we can switch it to phase as well. But basically, like the linear analysis mode of Plugin Doctor, the nice thing about it, it's a free plugin, and we can put it before and after the effect. So on this track we have Jacked Brat, and then we have Sausage Fattener on the second track, and we can solo between them. And in both cases we have our parameters mapped to the effects rack. So we have Jacked Brat on the top and Sausage Fattener on the bottom. So let's go through the different modes and see how they compare. Now this is again a linear analysis, so it's not telling the full story. We'll take a look at some test tones and the frequency response later, but for now we can get an idea. So by turning up the fat knob on Jacked Brat, we're getting this sort of relationship. It's pretty close to the same on Sausage Fattener. They're not perfectly synchronous through the entire range, but they're pretty close. So the low end basically looks good. Now let's look at just the color knob. So Jacked Brat, you see we have this curve starting about here, and then it's sort of gaining an amplitude going this way. Like that, and the same thing here. Now this does of course respond differently when we have the fat control up, so let's do it maybe halfway for now. And you notice a bigger change at the top end. This middle section starts to dip down. So you can see they're not totally equal, but they're pretty close. And then if we turn up the fat all the way, we start to get this shape. Now there's this dip here and here, which again, this is where the linear analysis might be failing us a little bit. We are going into that hyperbolic tangent stage of saturation, so there might be some aliasing or some fold back, or it's just the non-linearities kind of reflecting it on itself in the linear mode analysis here. But they're doing pretty similar things, so maybe the full fat isn't the best way to judge this, but we can see for most of the range they're pretty close. There's a bit of a gain difference, but I'm not too worried about that. We can more or less match the parameters. Right, so we have motor drums up here. We're just going to load a groove. We're listening to Sausage Fattener first here. They're pretty close. I wouldn't say that they're identical or anything like that. The color seemed to work almost identically on both units, but you could tell the low frequency distortion. It just has a slightly different character on Jacked Brat than Sausage Fattener. You can tell it's like a little more woofy. I think that might have something to do with the bandwidth and just the, sort of that shape on the Sausage Fattener. It is sort of a unique shape. They might have used a little bit more sort of hard clipping just on the peaks of the wave rather than soft clipping like a hypertangent. But I don't really want to mess around with hard clipping. You have to do a bunch of oversampling to reduce aliasing, and it's just a bit messy. And I think these sound pretty close, but definitely usable, and most of sort of the tonal character and most of the palette is here, I would say. So I think that's a pretty good start. Alright, so it turns out it's just hard clipping. It's not really a surprise. I put this block in. I might put an option to switch between soft and hard clipping, maybe by clicking on the sausage guy or something. And whether or not I want to use a poly block for oversampling, I'm not sure yet, but I kind of doubt the original plugin has oversampling. We'll see. Fixed it. Now there's a hard clipping mode, polynomial cubic, and the original hyperbolic tangent. I also added in a 4x oversampling for the hard clipping mode, which is apparent when we go to higher frequencies. We can see there's quite a bit of aliasing on the original Sausage Fattener, and we can always turn off the oversampling if we want to mimic that original response. So it turns out there is a compressor after all, but well, it's pretty hard to implement a good compressor in a Max for Live device. Luckily, you can just add the live compressor before Jacked Brat and it sounds pretty much identical to Sausage Fattener. Just copy these settings more or less, and then play around with the threshold, make sure makeup gain is on, and you can basically get the sound of Sausage Fattener by putting the compressor and Jacked Brat together. Well, here it is, Jacked Brat. You can see we have our fat control, our color. The color changes his color. The fat makes him angry. It's a very mature interface.